And then Beth, you can just let me know next slide and I will advance the slides for you.
All right, well, I think we'll just get started. My name is Teresa Holt. I'm the State Director for AARP Alaska. Welcome to our monthly fraud watchdog presentation. Today, we're going to have Beth Goldstein from the Office of Elder Fraud join us to talk a little bit about what they do and how to protect seniors against financial exploitation. Daryl, you want to do the next slide? Beth, tell us a little bit about the office, about yourself and about the Office of Elder Fraud.
Daryl, if you want to go ahead and click on the mouse, it'll bring in that the Office of Elder Fraud was created by the legislature in about 2006, 2007. And its mission is to investigate claims regarding financial exploitation of Alaskans who are 60 or older. The definition of financial exploitation is very broad. It can range from anything from a tenant that an elder can't get to pay rent or get out of a rental property or their home, to the typical things you think about, such as somebody misusing a power of attorney or gaining access to an elder's bank account. We bring civil remedies. So while we refer cases to law enforcement for criminal prosecution, we only bring civil remedies, such as we try to get the money back through lawsuits or various other types of filings that we can do that can force the individual to have to pay the funds back.
Beth, about how many cases do you have in a year?
It really depends on the year. COVID, of course, has kind of slowed things down, but we had typically about 25 to 30 cases that we moved forward with a year, but we get reports that we check out to determine whether or not there is fraud, and if there is fraud, is it a case that we could move forward on? And those can range anywhere from 30 to 50 a year, and that does not necessarily include just the scamming reports.
And then can you tell me a little bit about what kind of cases you would move forward on and which ones you might refer to other folks, or if there's any eligibility requirements?
Sure. So currently, the eligibility requirements are you must be 60 or older, and you must be a resident of Alaska. You don't have to live here full time, but you do have to have a residency status in Alaska. And you can't have so many monetary or financial resources that you would be able to hire a lawyer on your own in order to resolve the problem. That's pretty broad as well. Sometimes people have a lot of assets, but those assets are tied up in property, or those assets had been part of the scam. So we look pretty closely to see what the individual could or could not afford. The types of cases that we would move forward and or refer. So in our experience currently in Alaska, the Department of Law, prosecutors, and the law enforcement are very, very hesitant to move forward in a case where there's a family member involved. So if it's an adult child or another family member who is, say, misusing a power of attorney, it's very unlikely that the Department of Law is going to prosecute an individual like that. At least that's been our past experience. So we definitely take a look at those. One of the things that, depending on how we're going to move forward, so if we're just trying to stop the exploitation from happening, so somebody is being scammed because the scammers are calling them all the time and they're sending lots of money, or someone has an adult child who's using a power of attorney, and the most immediate thing we need to do is stop the person from taking the money, then it doesn't really matter whether or not that the perpetrator, if you will, could pay the funds back. The most immediate need is to stop the exploitation from happening. And we have various ways that we can do that. And so we'll look at those cases no matter what, as long as the individual is 60 or over. As it relates to cases that are that we would move forward on, we have to clearly be able to prove exploitation, and we do that through a variety of ways. But also the perpetrator, the individual who stole the funds, they can't be what we call judgment proof, right? And judgment proof means that they have no income, maybe they have a lot of criminal history, so they're not receiving a PFD, or their PFD is already being attached. They don't have native corporation dividends that they are able to use as income. They don't have any assets. They don't have any property. You can't get blood from a turnip. So individuals like those, while we would stop the exploitation, we're not going to bring a fraud case against them, because we can get a judgment, but we can't get any money back for the elder. If we can convince law enforcement to take those cases because the actions that the individual has taken really do fall under one of the criminal statutes, those are the cases that we more often than not really try to push law enforcement to take, because then the person can be prosecuted, potentially get jail time, and then the court can order restitution. And they, if that person's PFD ever becomes available, those restitution attachments have the highest priority, one of the highest priorities.
Great, great. Daryl, if you'll move to the next slide, we're going to talk about some signs of financial exploitation. So I know, Beth, when we worked in the past, you had told me about a boyfriend scam. And maybe give us that example, and then we can go through some of these other signs of exploitation.
Sure. And Daryl, if you hit the mouse again, I think it brings the title up on this. Okay, so there are, and I'll talk about the types of scams that there are a little bit lower, but there are various signs of financial exploitation. And these signs don't necessarily mean that someone is being financially exploited, but they are things that we look at that typically require additional investigation to see if some sort of exploitation is happening. And one of the things we like to do through these types of presentations, or presentations we do live, say at the Pioneer Home or some of the senior homes, is we really like to teach you what to look for, because you have family members and friends that you may see some of these things in that we don't normally get to, or the people who are coming to these types of programs are not the people who are typically being exploited. So we're giving you this information so that you can take it and take a look at if you see these types of things with your friends or family members, that you can give us a call, or you can give Adult Protect Services a call. So we look at things like the elder's lifestyle not being consistent with their income. You know, when we think about these normally, or you hear about those things, you typically hear about situations where someone is living a lifestyle that's higher than what they can afford. But in this particular situation, we are talking about an elder living way below their means and not being able to afford things they normally used to be able to afford. So you can see things like they're cutting their medication in half to try to make it last longer, or they're putting groceries back on the shelf because they don't have enough money to afford the groceries, even though that hadn't been a problem in the past. Maybe they're struggling to pay a utility bill, and the utility bills haven't gone up. They just no longer have the funds available to do that. So there are many things that can cause this, but it certainly is a sign that we take a look at if an elder is struggling and they weren't previously struggling. We look at, a sudden inability to pay bills. We see this a lot with scammers. People are sending thousands of dollars to, because they've won a prize, and now they suddenly have no money to pay for necessities. We also see that if someone has taken a lot of money out of their bank account. If there's an unusual transfer of assets from the elder to another person, so a lot of times we see this in bank records. We had a case where a school teacher had access to her mother's friend's online banking, and she would transfer the funds from that woman's account to hers. That's an unusual transfer. She's not her daughter. There's no past history. And she's not, there are still expenses for food and other things. So we're not seeing that money is being transferred to pay for utility bills or shopping trips for the elder. So that would be an unusual transfer of funds, assets, transfer of property, especially to somebody that's not related to them or in the family, that can be a sign of exploitation as well. The next slide. If you click on the next slide, keep going. Some of this has some movement to the slides from when it's done live. Okay, so the unexplained disappearance of funds or possessions, we see this a lot when we're dealing with personal care attendants in the home. So the best victims are our elderly who have memory issues, because it's very easy to blame the elderly person for not remembering where they put something like jewelry or cash that they had. If this is coming up pretty regularly and families reporting it, we're definitely going to take a look into that. And it's certainly, again, there may be memory issues there, that may be the problem, but we definitely want to make sure that we're not looking at exploitation. So that's why we would take a look at that and why it's a sign. We discovered that the elder's signature has been forged. We had a case where an individual had a stroke and unexpectedly ended up in the hospital. And when he came out of the hospital, his car and his boat had been transferred into his son's name. And when we asked him how that occurred, he said, well, I think there was a power of attorney. And we asked him if he had signed a power of attorney. And, with the stroke, sometimes people don't remember, but he was adamant that he did not believe he had signed a power of attorney. And we were able to obtain all the documents that we needed from the Department of Motor Vehicles. And sure enough, there was a power of attorney and it had been signed. But his ex-wife held a notary stamp and held her notary in the state of Washington. And so when we showed him the power of attorney, he said, that notary is my ex-wife. And it turns out that his son had in fact forged the power of attorney, and his ex-wife had provided blank notarized documents for this to occur. She was prosecuted in Washington. She actually worked for the court system in Washington, and he was prosecuted up here. But the scary thing about that power of attorney was it didn't just deal with financial assets. They were, certainly able to transfer his car and his boat, but that it also gave them full medical authority over him. And they could have made any medical decision they chose, including turning off life support with that power of attorney. So that was a pretty scary case. And we have seen those happen.
Beth, I'm sorry, can I ask you a question here?
Of course.
Do financial institutions, do they have the ability to raise any kind of red flag, or is there any kind of training that financial institutions receive on what to watch out for any kind of warning signs?
Yes, we get a lot of reports from financial institutions. The majority of the reports that the financial institutions provide to us are scams, people who are caught up in scams. But there are other things that can absolutely be red flags when you have multiple family members with competing power of attorneys going into the bank. That's definitely a red flag for them, and they will shut the account down in total until they have some resolution there. They do look, certainly we see situations like you'll see in one of these slides where a new individual is helping the elder come into the bank. So they have a care attendant or somebody new who's helping them. And, Mr. Jones used to come in regularly and take out $50 a week. And now he comes in, and at the urging of this new individual, he's taking $500 out a week. So they're definitely looking for those types of things. They do report if they're the first a lot of times to report on through their telephonic customer service line. If someone's trying to get into someone's account and they've had situations where individuals have been able to provide enough information to get in and then change passwords and the like. So they see those things and they do report. Some banks provide more training than others. They are all trying to get as up to date as possible on understanding the red flags that they might see in front of them. I would say that the biggest challenge that the banks face with respect to their front-facing individuals is that there's a lot of turnover in tellers. It's a pretty short-lived job. And so the training is not always as up to date with the individuals who might be face-to-face with the client, but they certainly do their best.
Thanks.
When we have an elder who has no concept of what's going on with their finances because they've recently turned them over to someone to help, this is kind of the situation where maybe the daughter has taken over mom's finances, which is not a problem. A lot of times, we're helping our parents with their finances, but mom's asking for some sort of an accounting, or, can I see the bills? Or she went to the grocery store. Can I see the receipts? Can you show me the checks? Or can I see the bill from the credit card? And they're not being given access to any of this information. That's definitely a red flag. Keep in mind that I say that these are red flags, and sometimes there's absolutely innocent behavior behind them. We many times as people become, dementia gets worse, dealing with their finances becomes much more stressful. And so the daughter may have been providing information at the front end and noticed how agitated mom would get the more information she gave her because she wasn't understanding it. And that may be why she stopped. But the point is that we need to ask those questions and make sure that there isn't more financial exploitation happening. So a person helping an elder with their finances, like I said, not providing receipts, or someone new, a neighbor that just comes in and sort of takes over the finances. Those are a lot of the signs of financial exploitation that we look at. And we've got some red flags in the screenshots ahead that we'll go over as well.
So Beth, when we were working together, when I was at the ombudsman's office, I came to you several times because we had a neighbor friend who things started disappearing from her house. Her, famous Makaton prints, expensive paintings, cars, boats, all those kind of things. And you and I had a whole discussion about, because if you asked her, she would say, "Oh, I gave that to them." And it really was a difficult line to walk until she got to the point where she was, like you said, unable to pay her bills because she was giving away things. So where does that line come in?
So it is a difficult line, and it takes, we have a full-time investigator. One of the things that full-time investigator will do is interviews. That individual will interview, of course, the elder, interview people around them. When we look to the case law that governs gifting in the state of Alaska, or what's called an inter vivos gift, meaning you're still alive and you're gifting, there's a three-part test that the court looks at. And one of those things is, does the individual understand the extent of their bounty? Okay, so the extent of their finances, their assets, and do they understand the impact giving this gift would have on their finances? Okay, so for instance, I have a case where $750,000 is alleged to have been given as gifts in the form of a $250,000 check and a $500,000 check. And the perpetrators allege that these were gifts, and the reality is this was 78% of this client's entire estate, right? Everything that they had, estate meaning not what you have after you've passed, but what you currently have, right? So this was 75% of all of their assets, and liquid and otherwise. The reality that someone would give away 78% of their assets or almost 90% of their cash is a good indication that they don't understand the impact that this is having on their finances. And so we would try to look at the entirety of what they're doing. We even do that when it comes to scams. So if you have someone who has millions of dollars and they're sending $500 a month to a scammer, yes, they're being scammed, but the chances of a conservatorship being put in place is pretty small, because they can afford that without diminishing with any intensity their assets or their income, right? And but when we have someone who only has income, say Social Security income of $1,300 a month, and they're sending $1,000 a month to a scammer, that is, that is impacting them to a point that they're never going to be able to absorb that. And that's what the courts look at as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so did you want to talk about some of the current common scams?
Yeah.
Okay, so we see, and that's the next slide, Daryl. We see charity calls. We've seen some of these. You'll see, we haven't seen these in a while, but there had been a scam going around with the troopers or the police fund, where they would call you. They would ask for you to send a money order, maybe a credit card to get your credit card number. And the key with these is you should know the charities that you want to donate to, and you should contact them. Or if someone does contact you and they say they're from a charity, make sure you recognize it and then find the real number and call them back. Don't call a number that they've given you. Counterfeit cashier's checks, those show up quite a bit. The banks end up with these a lot. So the individual is, typically the way this scam works, the individual is sent a cashier's check. They are told by the scammers that they should go ahead and deposit it. Let's say it's for $2,000. They should keep 500 of it and send 1,500 to whatever address that they're being told. And they're given any number of reasons for why in the world that this needs to happen. They've won a prize, or they're facilitating something, or this is a way to help to make money. It's a side gig, if you will. So the cashier's check is a counterfeit check. But what happens is that the banking system is about 7 to 10 days behind. When you put a check into the bank and it clears, it takes about 7 to 10 days for it to go through the National Clearinghouse for them to determine that it's not written on any real account. So you've put this into your bank account, you've taken $1,500 out thinking that this is going to cover it, you send it off. Well, you are now holding the bag for that $1,500. Okay. We had a law firm in town that was caught up in one of these. They had been contacted by an individual and told that this person was going to be buying property in Alaska. They wanted the lawyer to act to represent them, and they were going to send them funds to put into their trust account to hold until the closing date, until they had to put up the money for the closing date. So they sent a $450,000 cashier's check on day one. On date, they overnighted it. The law firm deposited it into their trust account. A day later, the law firm is contacted, told that the sale of the property has fallen through, to please issue the money back to them. The law firm did that, and they were out $450,000. Okay. If you get one of these, and if you get money out of nowhere, it's always too good to be true. If it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. But you want to test this out. My suggestion would be, because you don't have to trust me, go to the bank, open up a completely separate account, deposit that in there, and wait the full 10 days. And if it's still a good check, it's a good check. But if it's not, you are not out anything. Okay. Romance or foreign lotteries, these, we have so many people who get involved in these. You think that you can't imagine how somebody could. They get an email from, the Prince of Nairobi, or they get a phone call saying you won this lottery. And what we've come to learn is that this is really a brain science issue, and that one of the last things to develop as we get older, and if you have children and grandchildren, this, that is the filter that sort of, call it kind of our BS filter. It filters all those things coming at us and helps us determine the likelihood that they're true or not. So we can detect the BS, if you will. That's one of the last things that develops as we mature. It's why kids are so gullible, right? It's why teenagers kind of fall for things all the time. Well, as we get older, it's also the first filter in our brain that starts to diminish. And so what happens is we have all of this information coming at us, and as that filter becomes more and more porous, we believe things we would not necessarily have believed in our midlife, right? That we could detect, this is too good to be true. There's no way that this lottery that I never entered, I could be winning millions of dollars in. And the problem is that the scammers are able to take advantage of this because they also call tens of times a day, if not, they'll call 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times a day. So that voice is always in the individual's ear. And they're very good at attempting to create a rapport. And that rapport is going to be based on something they've gotten you to talk about that means something to you. Maybe you're very involved in your church, or you were a veteran and you served in a particular branch of the military, or you have a son or a daughter that does it. They will try to get you to talk about things about your life in order to hook you so they can build a rapport with you. And once they have that report, then they call back all the time. And you've got this filter that's it's very hard to determine if what they're saying is true. And they're putting pressure on you. If you don't send this money right now, you're going to lose out on this prize. And it's only $50. Then it's only $100. Then it's only $1,000. Okay. So we see these all the time. They're typically also, when they're asking you to send money, it's not typically by wire transfer anymore, because the banks have gotten wise to these and they will try to stop you from sending it. It's by MoneyGram, or it's by purchasing gift cards, Amazon gift cards, or Best Buy gift cards, or purchasing technology like iPhones, sending it to them. We've had situations, and when I tell you this filter has gone, you'll understand what I'm saying. We've had situations where the individual was told, okay, you need to send $1,000 to us and go buy a magazine and put the $100 bills in the pages of the magazine and put that in an envelope in the mail, because then it doesn't look like money. So it's not going to get stopped by the postal inspectors. If your filter was working, you would know that that sounds crazy. Why should I have to put $100 bills in the middle of a magazine to send it to you to get my prize? But the filter is gone, and that's what happens. And you know, a lot of the people who get caught up in these things, that they do have capacity in every other area of their lives, right? They may still be working. They are absolutely able to take care of themselves. Many times they were in professions that professional professions like accountants or lawyers or doctors, and they absolutely do not believe they can be scammed, and it makes them some of the most vulnerable victims.
Right, which leads us to like romance scams, right?
Romance scams, these happen all the time, especially if your Facebook is not locked down in its security preferences, or you get on Match.com, or you have a place where they especially can get access to instant message you over the app. And they can also find out information about you, especially if you don't lock these things down, you know, and they'll start a conversation with things like, oh, I see that you're from New Brunswick, New Jersey originally. Hey, my dad grew up in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Okay, and that's how they'll start the conversation with you. They will immediately try to get that conversation offline, off of Facebook, meaning they'll want to use a WhatsApp or a texting program, or they will want to text you directly. And this is very similar to what we see our teenagers going through, okay? So 99% of this conversation with this individual is electronic, right? You're emailing, or you're texting, or you're instant messaging. And so the neural pathway that you're creating in your brain is a connection to this individual. You're giving the inflection to the words they're typing. You're giving the tone to it. It's created in your head. And even though they may be saying the right things, typing the right words, you're creating this connection. It's this very false sense of intimacy, which is, you know, I had a teenage daughter, and I would explain to her the false sense of intimacy that is created through this electronic communication, because so much of it is in your head with tone and inflection, and it's very easy to get somebody to say what you want them when you're typing in those ways, and you hold back what you might say, and you don't see their personality. And these are some of the strongest bonds that are difficult to break, and individuals do not believe that they are being taken in by this individual. They believe they're in love with this individual. We see this a lot with elders who have lost a spouse and they are lonely and they have not had time to grieve. And the trauma of losing the spouse may absolutely make them much more vulnerable to these things. But I've seen cases where we had a 2-inch stack of emails and instant messages, and we could see the scam from almost its inception, which started on Facebook, and it morphed a couple of times along the way. So he lured her in, and one of the ways he lured her in was with the idea that he had a young son who was in California in school, but he was on a ship in the middle of the ocean. So this poor boy is at boarding school by himself, and he needed a phone, and I can't get to my funds because I'm in the middle of the ocean. Could you please send funds to him to buy a phone? He wants to go on this trip, school trip with his friends, and he has nothing to take pictures with. And it builds and builds. And then it was, I want to marry you. As soon as I get off the ship, I'm going to retire. And I've got all this money in an account. And I want us to buy a house together. And so I want to transfer this money into a joint account for us. Go set up that bank account. And then we can work with this president of this foreign bank to get the funds transferred. So now it's morphed into the bank fraud scam, where the money needs to be transferred, but there's all these fees associated with it. And it keeps getting stuck in customs at the airport. And then there's the drug fee because they think it's drug money. And you, as the loving individual who wants to help your love get the money over for the both of you to start your life, are putting all these fees up. And then it's, well, we need to get married. And so I need you to pay this lawyer. Now there's a lawyer involved who you only communicate with by email, to create a power of attorney and to submit this power of attorney. So now you're my wife and you have access to have these funds transferred to you. So it goes on and on and on. And this woman absolutely did not believe she wasn't communicating with the love of her life. And when he finally stopped communicating with her, they set up this whole ruse about how he was killed on the ship. So she still didn't believe that he was involved. And she was convinced that the lawyer had stolen the money. And it's just different email addresses. And many of you know how easy it is to set up an email address. So we see these romance scams all the time, and they are absolutely the hardest to break the bonds of. We see the Publishers Clearinghouse scam. That's, I just saw online recently, Publishers Clearinghouse legitimately does give money away. We actually have a woman in the Pioneer Home who has won the Publishers Clearinghouse scam. But the bottom line is, if you have to send any money to receive money or your prize, then it is a scam. Okay, there's no reason they can't take the taxes out of your winnings. There's no reason that you have to pay these fees ahead of time.
I've won the lottery like 5 times in the last few years, but I do just have to pay $1,000 to get my $1 million and my Mercedes.
Exactly. Loan, we had a case up in Fairbanks where the individual convinced folks that if they gave him $5,000 to invest, and this was around a ministry, and he would return it in 6 months for $20,000. He would return $20,000. And a return on investment like that, it sounds too good to be true, because it is too good to be true. Don't be taken in just because they say it's a ministry or they're building a church or the like. The irony is that the perpetrator in that case was trying to get funds because he himself was being scammed in one of these lottery scams, and he needed the money to send to his scammers. So it's a vicious circle. There are the grandchild needs bail scam, because I want to make sure we're staying on track here. Grandchild needs bail scam. You get the call that your grandchild is in jail somewhere, sometimes out of the country, sometimes in the country. Please, don't call mom and dad. Okay, nothing stops you from picking up the phone to call your grandchild. call your grandchild, okay? Call your son or daughter and just ask, where is John? Is John on vacation? Do you know if he's at school? What's he up to these days, right? If your grandchild is calling you because they need bail, make sure it's your grandchild and that bail is paid to a court system. It's never paid by a gift card, and most court systems don't take cash or wires. And then we have some new COVID-19 scams that you should be aware of. We have, I've looked some of these up recently. I haven't seen any yet, but that doesn't mean they're not coming. So these survey scams, where those scams are meant to get your personal information, where you're giving them social security numbers, medical information, financial information. Be careful, don't fill those out. Be careful about purchasing vaccine cards. Even if you've been vaccinated, there are scams out there that offer to give you an official vaccine card that's in the National Health Registry. Those things don't exist. So be very careful with any solicitation related to you having to pay for something COVID-19 related or something vaccine related. Okay.
Next slide.
All right, so we have red flags that we have you guys look for that definitely can be signs of exploitation as well. And these are things like the mail is piling up, okay? And there's lots of unpaid bills. This can be a sign that an individual doesn't have the money to pay for those things. And so it's causing them a lot of stress. They don't even want to open the mail. But it can also be a sign that the person just needs help with their finances due to dementia, or even sometimes just due to eyesight. And we can certainly help get a conservator or a limited conservatorship in place to help them do that. But it's definitely a sign that something is going on. They're excited about winning a lottery or a prize. At first, they may talk about it a lot and tell you what they're going to win and what they're going to do with it, or they talk about how they're going to be coming into a lot of money. And that's an indication that they very well might be caught up with a scammer. They may talk about it at first, and then they might become kind of very secretive about things. The scammers have learned to educate the victim on how to keep things from their family members and their friends, to lie about who they're talking to. They may never have done a lot of texting or WhatsApping in the past, and all of a sudden they're getting texts all the time or WhatsApps all the time, and they'll stop everything to look at it, okay? And then they'll tell you, oh no, it was nothing, right? Or, it was somebody that would never text them. Okay, you want to keep an eye out for those types of things. They're taking out a lot of money and they won't disclose why. And so let me give you kind of a situation that I'm talking about here. One of the very first Publishers Clearinghouse scams that we dealt with was a woman who, she was still working. She had a very close relationship with her broker, right? They had a very personable relationship. So she didn't just meet with this woman once a year to go over her finances. She had an investment account and she talked to her regularly. And all of a sudden, she was writing very large checks to herself in order to get funds. And the brokerage agent attempted to kind of start conversations with her about, oh, are you finally remodeling the bathroom? Oh, did you find a new car? To try to get her to talk about what she was doing with the money. And she absolutely would not talk about what she was doing with this money at all. And that was a clear red flag for that brokerage agent that something was going on. And it turned out that she was caught up in this Publishers Clearinghouse scam, and she was sending them tens of thousands of dollars in these green money cards at the time. And it's that change in relationship. It's them acting differently. And it was just a flag that somebody needed to look into it a little bit further. They have a new companion, advisor, or power of attorney. This is just, that it's not just that they have this new person, it's that they're acting slightly differently because of this new person. So like I talked about, the new companion who takes them into the bank, and now they're taking more money out than they used to, or, they're giving that person gifts. And, we're not talking about somebody they've known for a long period of time. This is somebody new, or, they have signed a power of attorney to someone like the neighbor next door who just moved in. They don't really know this person. So we're talking about new people that don't have an established relationship with the individual, but they're doing things that you would expect somebody more established would be doing with the individual. The person is fearful or distressed or depressed, and this is definitely out of character for them. Normally they're not worried about how they're paying their bills. Normally, sure, they know they have limited finances, but it's not a huge cause of stress for them to the point that they won't go to the doctor and they're sick because they're afraid of what type of copay they might have to pay. Okay. Unusual checks written from the account. So, checks to something that just seems out of character for them, maybe to jewelry stores or the like. Personal care attendants or people who gain access to your home, they can come in and steal checks. Now, they don't take the check off the top of the checkbook. They take the check from the middle of the checkbook, and they may try to forge that check or convince the elder to write a check for something that is kind of completely out of character for them, like say a jewelry store. The individual has been a victim of exploitation in the past. So once someone has been the victim of financial exploitation once, they have like a 75% chance of being a victim again. And again, we're usually talking about this filter has gone to a point that it's not serving them anymore.
Well, you and I played, and
I don't know what that was. Again, so charges inconsistent with the elder's lifestyle. Those are situations where someone's charging things, or you see things on their credit card because you're helping them, like jewelry stores, or we had one situation where we were seeing timeshare costs for a new timeshare purchase for a woman who was 90 years old. So those are a lot of the red flags we'll see. We asked the banks to take a look if someone new is accompanying the elder into the bank, they're withdrawing more money than they usually did. Elders who have someone who handles their finances and they're complaining that they cannot get a hold of this person won't call them back, this person's not providing them statements. We had a gentleman out in the valley who swore that he was investing with this individual. He would send them $1,000 a month. He never got a statement. He never had an account number. Those types of things should be red flags.
Beth,
So
I
those are the
remember
types of things we're talking about.
a situation where a staff person didn't take checks, but they took a picture while the individual was in the bathroom. They took a picture of the front and the back of the credit card. And then all of a sudden, a lady who never eats Kentucky Fried Chicken, it had been used to pay for utilities, purchases at the store, all of those kind of things.
Yep, all of those types of things. So those are unusual charges
Right.
to the card.
So tell us a little bit about how people can protect themselves and their family and their friends.
Sure. So you never, ever want to give your account information out to someone who has called you. Obviously, if you've called the bank, or you've initiated the call to the credit card company, or you've initiated the call to the utility company, that's a different story. But if someone is calling you and asking you for your account information, you don't want to give it to them, and you need to do something else to verify that they are who they are. So let's say somebody is claiming to be GCI. Again, you don't call the number they give you. You go and you look up the GCI number and you call GCI in order to say, hey, I was told there was something wrong with my account. Okay. Never give out your social security number. Again, when you're solicited to do that, of course, you know, like if you call into USAA, you've got to provide your social security number or your member number in order for them to help you, but you've initiated that call. Sometimes people get a lot of phone calls from telemarketers and these scammers and the like. They certainly, you know, they don't want to turn their phone off. They don't always want to block unknown numbers because they don't know if their grandchild's going to get a new phone, or they don't have their doctor's number in their phone and the doctor or the lab might be calling them. But people can get really flustered on the phone, especially if someone has a lot of charisma and can kind of suck them in pretty quickly. So we do recommend that if that's an issue for you, you can just put a script next to your phone, or keep a script in your purse or near your cell phone, and it just says, I'm sorry, I don't give personal information out over the phone. And you just, if you write it down, all you have to do is read it. You don't have to remember what those words are. So you should feel free to do that. Again,
So Beth, my mom is 87, and she recognizes that it's too hard for her to say no to people on the phone. So she just doesn't, she has an answering machine that she can hear, and she just won't pick up unless it's one of her grandkids or her kids or somebody she knows. I think that's a really good tactic.
That's
too.
a great idea. It is a great idea. A lot of people don't have a landline with an answering machine, or they use their cell phone. And again, you know, I got a call the other day on my cell phone that it totally looked like a local call too. It was like a 907-775 number. And when I didn't pick it up because I was busy, but when I listened to the message, it was an Autobot telling me that my social security number had been compromised and that I needed to press 1 to do blah, 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 right? And so I called the number back, which was a not working number. And it's because even though it shows up as a local number, they have spoofed that number in order to try to scam you. So it's very difficult to know. And the telephone company, even AT&T on your cell phone, they try to mark it as potential spam, but a lot of them get through. So you can just hang up on them. You don't have to say anything to them, but you know, if you want to remember what to say, you can certainly have a script.
So Beth, I see we're running out of time. What can people do if they think that they know somebody, or they think that they're being involved in a scam? Keep going, Daryl, one more.
Okay, so you can certainly contact our office, and our contact information is at the end of the slides. You can Google us, the Alaska Office of Elder Fraud. We would much rather have somebody report something that seems suspicious, or they might think is exploitation, and we check it out and it's not, than someone not report and then the person loses their life savings. So over report, don't under report. You can certainly contact Adult Protective Services. Most of their reports are required online, but you can report exploitation to them as well. And then we have some tools in our toolbox that allow us to handle things in an emergency situation. We have a thing called, and this is available to everybody, but we use it quite a lot. We're one of the main users of this tool. It's called a Financial Abuse Protective Order. It's like a domestic violence protective order, but it's specifically aimed at the finances of an individual who is being exploited or scammed or stolen from. And we can use that to do a myriad of things. We can freeze bank accounts. We can prevent transfers of property, prevent transfers of motor vehicles. We can, freeze credit cards. So we have these in we can cancel powers of attorney with it. So we file this with the court initially without somebody on the other side to get an emergency order. And then within 20 days, the court has a hearing. And so then the person against whom the order is being issued has the right to respond, but it can stop things immediately to stop the bleeding.
Right. So when I was at the ombudsman, we worked with you on a lot of cases, situations where maybe I remember one where the parent had millions of dollars and two siblings were sort of fighting over who was going to get the money, and the mother wasn't dead yet. And we were able to do that because money was being transferred. We worked with you and you were able to get the money to stop being transferred to one daughter or the other's account, because if I remember right, they both had power of attorneys and the mother just couldn't say no to either of her daughters. We had situations where people were, a grandchild or somebody would come and live in their home, and then all of a sudden they were transferring the house over. So Daryl has put up the contact information, and that would be a great place to go to, specifically for financial fraud. If it's other kinds of abuse and neglect, then you have to go to Adult Protective Services. I did want to just see if we had any of our folks online had any questions. You can unmute yourself or you could type a question in chat.
Beth, I just have one quick question. I'm just going to grab this pause here real quick. You mentioned a conservancy, I believe is the term that you used. Do you have a real quick definition on that?
A conservatorship?
Conservatorship, that was it. Thank you.
Yeah, a conservatorship is where the court appoints an individual, either someone that has been nominated by the person, or a family member or a private individual that the court has assessed to specifically handle their finances. So they handle all of their income, whether that's from, say, a retirement fund or a pension, or because they're still working. They pay all of their bills with their income, with the person's income. They apply for all benefits that they're eligible for. They also can handle, if somebody is involved in a lawsuit, they would hire the attorney. So they handle everything financial for the individual. The one thing that I would say, Teresa, is I cannot tell you how many times we have individuals say to us, I knew my mom was caught up in a scam and I didn't know who to call, right? Like, we knew that she was sending money or that she was caught up in this thing. We knew it was fraud and we couldn't get her to stop. The police couldn't do anything. We called the FBI line and we didn't get a response. No, we didn't know who to call. We didn't know what to do. And we are the people that you call for that, because as long as they're 60 or older, we can at least stop the scamming from happening by stopping the elder from sending the money.
Well, thank you, Beth, so much for sharing time with us today. And for the folks online, if you hear about it or you hear about it in the future, you never know who you're going to come across. Make sure that they know about the Office of Elder Fraud if somebody even suspects that something's going on, because once the money's gone, it's hard to get back. But if you can stop it from going out, that's the best case scenario often. Thank you again.
Thank you, Teresa and Beth. Linda Kruger down in Juneau. This has been very useful, great information, and thank you so much for the presentation.
Great.
Welcome.
All right. I think we're done. Thank you, Daryl and Katie, for assisting us today.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Beth.